a good talk. I'll do my best. Yeah, my name's Kate, and I'm a full-time writer and historian, and I specialise in the medieval Middle East, which is what brought me to write this book, Queens of Jerusalem. And today I'm going to talk to you about the first three Queens of Jerusalem, who were all Armenian or of very recent Armenian heritage. The most important queen I'm going to talk about is Queen Melisende of Jerusalem, who was half Armenian and born in the county of Edessa. So anyway, and we'll have questions at the end, of course. So the first thing I'm going to do is, because I've had a little chat with a few of you already, and the question that I think everyone I've spoken to has asked is what brought me to studying this period, so medieval Jerusalem in particular, period and region. And the story behind that is I studied the Crusades at school and at university, and in the course of studying the Crusades, I came across some very interesting women who were consistently left out of the historical narrative. So the Crusades, being generally considered a period of military history, has traditionally been written about mostly by male historians, and more relevantly, the men writing the chronicles in the Middle Ages were pretty much exclusively churchmen. So not only were they men, they were also men whose lives featured very little interaction with women, and this in turn led to the stories of women, the deeds of women, the achievements of women being left out of the medieval documents documenting what was going on at the time. And so that in turn has influenced modern histories, which again don't really emphasise women in the Crusades. So I wanted to fix that, and I found the women particularly interesting. And so yeah, that led me to my book and to what I'm going to talk to you about today. And in particular, I'm going to try and draw out the connections between Armenia and Armenian Cilicia and the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. So the association between Armenia and Jerusalem has gone back back to the Babylonians, so thousands of years. And because there's always been fluidity and trade and movement between these two regions, they essentially neighbour each other. And this connection became even stronger with the advent of Christianity, so with the birth of Christ. As I'm sure most of you know, the Armenian Apostolic Church was founded in the 1st century AD, and it was started by the apostles Bartholomew and Thaddeus. So Armenia and Armenians have a very long connection with Jerusalem, with Christianity. On top of this, Armenia is the first nation, the Kingdom of Armenia is the first nation to convert to Christianity as a state religion. This happens in the year 301 AD. So the Armenian connection with Jerusalem, with Christianity, is well established. And Armenian people have been undertaking pilgrimages to the holy places in Jerusalem for as long as Christianity has existed. So there's always been, since the birth of Christ, there has been a steady movement of pilgrims and traders to and from the Armenian regions to Palestine and Jerusalem, etc. So the heritage is very strong, and on top of this, Jerusalem has changed hands. It's been held by many different regimes and empires over the years, and throughout that time, the Armenian presence in Jerusalem has been consistent and well established, more so than other ethnic groups and religions. The Armenians somehow managed to coexist reasonably well with empires of different faiths and different religions, and with less conflict than other branches of Christianity. So the Armenian connection with Jerusalem is very well established. Yeah, and we can tell this in part because we have archaeological evidence. We not only have textual evidence of the Armenian presence in Jerusalem, but also very important archaeological evidence. So we have mosaics like this dating back to the 5th and 6th centuries, which clearly document not only that Armenians were there, but that they had a strong enough presence to be building buildings, having their own religious establishments that were, as you can see, very well decorated. So there was wealth and investment there. So these mosaics all come with Armenian inscriptions, which show clearly the presence of Armenians in the Holy Land. So this brings us to where my research really kicks off, which is the First Crusade. So the Crusades, and I'm going to go a bit basic, I'm sure some of you know more about the Crusades, some of you less, I'm just going to give a brief overview. But the Crusades were essentially a military venture, an armed pilgrimage coming from southern and western Europe to the Holy Land in response to a call from Alexius Comnenus, who was the Byzantine emperor, who put out a call for aid from the west to liberate the holy places. And he, in his appeal for aid, he said that the native Christians, Greek Christians and Armenian Christians, Syriac Christians, Maronite Christians, who were living in the Holy Land were suffering terrible abuses by the Islamic rulers of the region, and that so could the great powers of the West, so particularly France, Italy, come and liberate the holy places. And the First Crusade was preached by Pope Urban II at the Council of Clermont, where he made a very rousing and very compelling speech entreating the European aristocracy to take up arms and journey to Jerusalem. And they did. And the 5 most important leaders of the Crusade, we have Raymond, Count of Toulouse, we have Bohemond of Taranto in Italy, his nephew Tancred, then we have Baldwin of Bourg, Baldwin of Boulogne, and Godfrey of Bouillon. And these are the great leaders of the Crusade, in tandem with the papal legate Adhemar of Bequia. So these men journey across Europe, mostly overland, to Jerusalem. And on the way, they begin to conquer territories. So I'm just going to refer to a map. This map is from my book. It's very nice. And so they move. They come from southern France and Italy. They march across here. Some go through Italy and come to Constantinople, where they receive the help of Alexius Comnenus. And the first big battle is the Battle of Nicaea, which is, isn't it, in modern Turkey, just outside of Constantinople. And then they have this very difficult march down through Asia Minor to reach Antioch, and it's an incredibly difficult journey. As you can see, Antioch is here, and when they get to the county of Edessa, this is when the army begins to split and priorities begin to change slightly, because this is very important for the Queens of Jerusalem, who we'll come to shortly. Baldwin of Boulogne stops in Edessa, which is, Thaddeus of Edessa is one of the founders of the Armenian Church, so, and this is a region obviously always inhabited by Armenians. So Edessa is a very important territory for Armenians. And Baldwin manages to persuade the childless ruler of Edessa, Thoros, to adopt him as his heir. And then very conveniently for Baldwin, perhaps on Baldwin's scheming, on Baldwin's initiative, the citizens of Edessa rise up and murder Thoros, pretty much, within weeks of Thoros adopting Baldwin as his heir. The result is that Baldwin becomes the Count of Edessa and in control of this very important territory. And so the County of Edessa becomes the first Crusader state established in the Latin East, which is very important. The Crusaders then continue down the coast, they go through Antioch, they have an amazing and an epic siege of Antioch, which I wish I could tell you all about because it's the most exciting piece of military history I've ever read about. It's brilliant, but we don't have time. And they go down through Antioch and eventually capture Jerusalem, which is an incredible achievement. No one thought they'd be able to do it. And it's also horrible because it's a complete massacre. They kill everyone inside, Christians, Jews, Muslims alike. It's indiscriminate slaughter, so very bad. But in this way, the Crusader states of Outremer, land overseas, are forged. And this is where these are the main states of the Latin East. So the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Tripoli, and all focusing on the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The first king of Jerusalem is Godfrey of Bouillon. He is unmarried and dies childless. So then the throne of Jerusalem passes to his brother, Baldwin of Boulogne, who is at this time ruling Edessa. So then Baldwin of Boulogne leaves Edessa and comes to Jerusalem. When he became Count of Edessa, he was persuaded by his advisors that the most practical thing he could do to shore up his position in this territory, which, as you can see, borders Armenian Cilicia and Melitene, another very important territory, is to marry a local Armenian bride, and this he does. And this woman becomes, technically speaking, the first Queen of Jerusalem. So if you look her up on the internet, you're probably going to find her called Ada of Armenia. The name Ada, no idea where it comes from. There's no contemporary sources that call her Ada. The first time she's called Ada is in a history written in the 17th century, and we don't know where that historian got that name. And recent research by a very good historian called Sue Edgington, she's actually made quite a compelling case that the more likely name was the name Arete, which means goodness. So I call her Arete in my book, but she's more commonly known as Ada. So this woman, I'm going to call her Arete, becomes the first Queen of Jerusalem when her husband descends to the throne of Jerusalem. However, she's never crowned, and actually originally her husband doesn't bring her to Jerusalem with him. He leaves her in Edessa. And then a few years later, after he's become king of Jerusalem, he summons her to join him in Jerusalem. And she comes from Edessa, she travels overland from Edessa to Antioch. Then she goes to, it's not actually marked, but there's the port of Antioch here, it's called St. Simeon, and takes a boat down to Jaffa and then goes to Jerusalem that way. A few years later, Baldwin decides he wants to repudiate her, to divorce her. And the reason he gives for this divorce to be legal is he argues that she has been unfaithful to him on the journey from Edessa to Jerusalem. This is very unlikely, and indeed the only source that we have that really talks about it claims that she wasn't unfaithful, she was actually raped by pirates on the journey. So in any case, this is not a divorce that should be sanctioned by the church or should go through. But the reason he chooses to divorce her is A, she's failed to provide him with children, which really isn't her fault given that he's not seen her for 3 years. And secondly, that her father, the Lord of, it's not marked on the map, but the territory just across the border, her father had promised to supply her with a dowry of 70,000 gold bezants, which is a significant amount of money, and he actually only provided the first down payment of 7. So this woman has failed to give children, failed to bring the dowry with her, and to cap it off, her father actually loses his territory in battle very shortly after the marriage. So she's now useless to her husband, and for this reason he repudiates her. And here's a nice map of medieval Jerusalem, we'll come back to this. He sends her to live at this abbey, newly built in Jerusalem, which anyone who's been in Jerusalem or was born in Jerusalem, I think might know. It's the Church of St. Anne. And this was built in the Crusader period. And Arete of Armenia was one of the first high-status women to take the veil and become a nun in the Church of St. Anne. So that's her story. And so Arete is technically the first queen of Jerusalem. She's of Armenian origin, but she has very little influence. She's hardly in Jerusalem, and her husband divorces her very quickly after she does arrive there. However, her life doesn't stop there. She spends a few years in the convent, quite unhappy, I can imagine. At this point, there's only a very small community of nuns living there. So she's one of about 3 other nuns, and it's not much fun. And in time, she receives permission to go and join her father, who after losing his territories in Armenia, moved to the court of Constantinople. And then we have evidence that Arete went to Constantinople and apparently had a very colourful life there. Talks of her living very promiscuously, but I think this is highly unlikely. She's obviously a woman from a religious background, an aristocratic background. The idea of her suddenly giving up all the values of her time as soon as she got to Constantinople is very unlikely. This is more likely to be a smear campaign against an unpopular queen. Anyway, so much for the first queen of Jerusalem. The second queen of Jerusalem that we discover is not, in fact, of Armenian origin. She is the queen of Sicily, the mother of the king of Sicily, who is brought over with a lot of gold, a lot of soldiers and a lot of boats to marry Baldwin and become the queen. Baldwin marries her, takes her money, takes her soldiers, takes her boats, and then has a crisis of faith where he decides he really should, for the good of his soul, take back his original wife. So he sends the new wife back to Sicily in shame and destroys the relationship between the king of Jerusalem and the kingdom of Sicily for centuries. Sicily will never aid Jerusalem, despite its very good position in the Mediterranean to do this. And he tries to get Arete back from Constantinople, but Arete's not having any of it, and she says, no thank you, I like my life here, I'm going to stay. So Baldwin, unsurprisingly, after we've seen of his relationships with women, dies childless, and thus the throne of Jerusalem passes to his cousin, another Baldwin, who has taken over rule in the county of Edessa. So this is Baldwin II. And Baldwin II has a much more successful marriage with his Armenian wife. It becomes the trend of the Crusaders who rule Edessa to marry local Armenian women. And he marries a woman called Morphia of Melisende. And she's really the first important queen of Jerusalem. She's Armenian, but she's of Greek Orthodox religion, which is common in this region at this time. Armenians tend to be either of the Armenian Orthodox faith or of Greek Orthodox faith. And actually, there isn't enough documentation to tell you how that division happens, but it does. And Morphia is from a Greek Orthodox family. But her mother tongue would have been Armenian. She would have been raised speaking Armenian and probably reading biblical Greek. But if she was educated to read at all, we don't know very much about her. And at the age of 25, she married one of the most eligible men in the region, Baldwin of Bork, the Count of Edessa. And they lived in Edessa for some time, and within a few years of their marriage, she will give birth to her first daughter, Melisende, and we will talk a bit more about her later. Baldwin and Morphia have 4 daughters and no sons, which in this time, as we've seen, could be a reason to repudiate her or divorce her. Secondly, like her predecessor Arete, Morphia's father fails to deliver the entire dowry that he promises to deliver with her, and just as with Arete, her father, who is the Lord of Melisende, loses the territory of Melisende very shortly after their marriage. For all this, Baldwin stays with Morphia. Why is this? The odds are, there are 2 reasons why he would stay with a wife who had failed to provide the dowry, the alliance, and the son that he required. One, the hope is that there was genuine human connection between them, that he loved her. Another is that he was truly a man of faith, and we do have evidence in the sources that Baldwin was a very religious man. They talk about him having calloused knees from praying so much, so there's a suggestion that he's perhaps plays less fast and loose with canon law than his predecessor, but also the fact that Morphia is clearly a very strong individual. The sources do not tell us this. We don't have any medieval sources saying Morphia was a brilliant woman. We do have these sources about her daughter, by the way. The sources are very complimentary of Melisende. But we can tell from Morphia's actions and the number of storms that she weathered and retains her position that she's a very powerful and forceful woman. During his time as Count of Edessa, Baldwin is captured and held in prison for several years. Morphia is the one who negotiates his release from prison. Later, when he ascends the throne of Jerusalem, following the death of his cousin, we can then see the connection between them very closely. Baldwin I leaves his Armenian wife in Edessa. She's useless to him now. Baldwin II, not only he goes to Jerusalem without her, but he refuses to be crowned. He refuses to go through his coronation until his wife and daughters can also join him in Jerusalem. And so Morphia and Baldwin are very importantly crowned together on Christmas Day in the Church of the Holy Nativity. So this shows the store he sets by his wife and shows that from the beginning his reign and his partnership with her is going to be one of equal partnership, and that she will be playing a role. Now, Morphia is only queen consort, so she doesn't inherit power. The power doesn't come through her blood, it comes through her marriage. So she is not officially invested with royal power. However, at this time, queen's consort or princess's consort, or whatever rank you were, wives did look after their husbands' estates if their husbands were incapacitated, if their husbands were ill, if their husbands died, if their sons were too young to rule, or in the case of what will happen with Baldwin and Morphia, if their husbands are imprisoned. So when the Crusader states are formed, it's a region of intense instability. There is war at every border, there is war all the time. They are establishing a new land, a new country, new kingdoms in the midst of hostile territory, with enemies coming from all sides. So Baldwin is a very active military leader as king. And I'm going to refer to my notes here to give you the correct dates. But, yes. Yeah, and in 1124, after ruling as King of Jerusalem for several years, Baldwin is captured in, I believe it's the Battle of Haran. Yes. Yes, Baldwin is captured once again and is held prisoner. And during this time, the rule of the Kingdom of Jerusalem is given into Morphia's hands, and Morphia is in charge not only of administering the kingdom, but of arranging her husband's escape or release. And this is where we come to one of the episodes that really shows the role that Morphia is taking in the politics and the governance of the region, which is she masterminds a rescue mission to try and spring her husband from captivity. At this time, he's being held in a castle called Karpat, and Morphia, we can see her Armenian heritage and Armenian influence coming in here, decides not to entrust the rescue mission to Frankish soldiers in the Latin East, but rather to assemble a crack team of 100 elite Armenian soldiers who she sends to go and try and rescue her husband from Karpat. And the reasons for choosing the Armenian soldiers are many. I mean, firstly, they will all be native-born local Christians, so they will speak some Arabic in addition to Armenian. They will find it easier to go in disguise, for starters. And it's very clear that they're not Frankish. So even in Islamic territory, you do have Armenians living at this time. They can pass they can pass unnoticed through Islamic territory in a way that Frankish soldiers cannot. Secondly, as we talked about, Armenians have been living and fighting in the Holy Land for centuries. They know the enemy very well. They're more in tune to Muslim battle practices and strategies. So they are very experienced elite soldiers, and this is well known in the Crusader states at this time. So Morphia sends this crack team of 100 men to Karpat to try and spring her husband from captivity. They go disguised as monks. They say that they're Armenian monks. They say they've been mistreated on the road to Karpat and that they must open the doors to the city so that they can speak with the governor and make their complaints about the breach of peace and the harassment they've experienced. Of course, as soon as the doors are open, they pull off their robes and they have swords underneath, and there's a major battle. And they succeed in getting Baldwin out of his cell. However, once they've got the king out of their cell, they still need to fight their way out. This is where it does not go so well. They manage to take the citadel of the town, which is the fortified fortress at the centre, but this doesn't get them any closer to escaping. So then they're in a standoff in the citadel. They hold the citadel, but the enemy are attacking them from outside. And unfortunately, they're unsuccessful in fighting their way out. So the life of Baldwin, as he's a very valuable hostage, is spared, but unfortunately the soldiers that Morphia sent are all killed in rather brutal ways, so they don't make it home. Morphia doesn't give up, however. At this time she has moved to the north to be as near to Karpat as she can, and she is leading the diplomatic negotiations for the release of her husband. The original captor, an Emir named Balak, does not want to release Baldwin, but he actually dies not long into Baldwin's captivity and is replaced by another Emir called Timurtash, who doesn't want the responsibility or the liability of having a very restless king of Jerusalem in the dungeon of his castle trying to escape. It's more trouble than it's worth. So he lets it be known that for the right ransom, he will release Baldwin. And Morphia manages to raise this ransom. However, in those days, it's not as simple as a bank transfer or, you know, a sports bag full of $100 bills that can be handed over. This ransom is for 80,000 dinars, and, you know, a dinar is, you know, a serious piece of gold. So 80,000 of those, we're talking many, many treasure chests, and you can't just fling it over. So in order for a ransom like this to be delivered, you need months. And in addition to the ransom of dinars, he also asks for certain territories in the region of Antioch to be handed over. So what's negotiated is that Baldwin will be released early to help gather the ransom and bring it, but in exchange, Morphia will give up her youngest daughter to be a hostage instead of Baldwin. So the king of Jerusalem is released, but the 2-year-old Princess Abbott is escorted from Jerusalem, and she is put in captivity at the castle of Shiza. And she's held in captivity for over a year, during which time her father does visit her, but also potentially angering his wife, he plays sort of Russian roulette with his daughter's wife. One of the terms of his release is that he will ally with Timurtash against the Bedouin to drive the Bedouin out of Timurtash's territory. What Baldwin does instead is ally with the Bedouin against Timurtash. All the while his daughter is in their hands. And we don't know why Timurtash doesn't kill Abbott. He'd be within his rights to do so legally within this agreement that they've made. But maybe he realises that this would bring the conflict from the political to the personal. If he kills the princes of Jerusalem, no amount of diplomatic negotiations are gonna work. There's gonna be vengeance. So she isn't killed. Eventually, Baldwin succeeds in taking the castle and bringing his daughter back to Jerusalem. But it's a major incident in their marriage and in Abbott's life and in Morphia's life. Morphia will die not long after this. She's in her late 40s at this time, and she will choose to be buried separately from her husband. So the kings of Jerusalem are buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And where's my clicker? And Morphia will choose instead. We'll come back to some of these slides. They're very nice. Morphia will choose instead to be buried in the Church of St Mary. So this church is the birthplace of the Virgin Mary. So, and it's is it the birthplace? No, forgive me. It's the burial place of the Virgin Mary. Thank you. And Morphia will choose to be buried here in this alcove down the stairs. So as you enter, there's this monumental staircase, and this alcove is still preserved today. And it's just on the side. It's very unassuming, and she's buried there. And then Mary is buried at the bottom of the stairs in the centre of the church. And this is another picture of the tomb where Morphia is buried. And soon her daughter, well, not soon, but some decades later, her eldest daughter Melisende, the Queen of Jerusalem, will choose to be buried there as well. So Morphia, she was crowned Queen Consort of Jerusalem, but clearly wielded a lot of power during that time, and so she is the first real Queen of Jerusalem. As we've seen, Arete was never crowned and was sent to a nunnery pretty much as soon as she arrived in Jerusalem, and then went to Constantinople. And then Adelaide of Sicily, who came to replace her, came, gave a load of money, and then was sent packing very quickly. So again, wasn't crowned and really didn't wield any power and influence in the kingdom. So Morphia is the first Christian woman to rule in Jerusalem since the Arab conquests. And she plays a pivotal role in establishing the kingdom of Jerusalem, bringing her husband out of captivity, ruling the kingdom in his absence, and also, not to be underestimated, in raising her daughter Melisende, who is going to in time become one of the most important political figures of the medieval Middle East, and one of the most important figures in female history. You know, she becomes a trailblazer for female power and female monarchy. So, as discussed, Baldwin II and Morphia had no male children. They had 4 daughters, and so this brings into the question of succession, because female succession is not really done. It's very rare for women to inherit power through their own blood, and it's even rarer for them to inherit power on their own. So the first thing is that Baldwin must find a husband for his daughter Melisende. Now, that said, he's been grooming Melisende for power from a young age. So I'm just going to talk a tiny bit about Melisende's early life. So these are pictures, not very good ones, that I took when I was in Urfa. So Urfa is the modern name of Edessa, which is the territory we've been talking about so far. And these two pictures show the walls of the citadel of Edessa, which is where Morphia and Baldwin would have lived together when they were ruling this territory. And it's where Melisende would have been born. So it's a huge citadel raised from a huge basalt cliff face with a massive moat in the centre of modern Urfa. So this is where Melisende would have been born. And she spent the first 12 years or so of her life living in this citadel, living in this place. Then when her father becomes king of Jerusalem, she travels with him, and she and her sisters witness the coronation in the Church of the Holy Nativity in Bethlehem. From that day forward, Baldwin is treating his daughter Melisende as though she is his heir. So he's educating her. Melisende is literate, and she's also, which is rare for a woman in this time, and is rare for a ruler in general at this time. And she's also attending meetings of the Haute Cour, so the High Council of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. So she's being taught politics at her father's knee from a young age, which is a rare choice on the part of kings in this time. So it's very clear that she's being groomed for succession. In addition to this, she is being recognised as the daughter of the king and the heir to the kingdom in charters. So when the Haute Cour or the King of Jerusalem issues a charter, so giving land or giving money or changing the laws or whatever it might be, we begin to see Melisende's name as a witness list, on the witness lists of these charters, thus demonstrating that she is playing an important political role and she is attending these meetings and is being groomed for succession. Now there are two reasons for this. One is perhaps that her father really wants her to succeed to the throne, which I hope is true. The other is that he wants to make her an attractive candidate for powerful men to come and marry. And the sort of men that he would want to come and marry his daughter and become king of Jerusalem are going to have lands themselves. They're going to be princes, they're going to be counts, they're going to have responsibilities at home. And men will only, these lords will only leave their lands in Europe behind if they think they're going to become the king of Jerusalem. So Baldwin wants to make it very clear that Melisende, whoever marries Melisende, will become the king. On the back, who comes out to marry Melisende, he's much older than her, but he's a good candidate in many respects because he has been on crusade before. He came out in the 1120s. Yeah, in the 1120s. And so he's been to the east, and he's also he's a seasoned ruler. So he's the Count of Anjou, which is a very important territory in France. His son Geoffrey has recently married Matilda of England, so is in line for the throne of England. He's a very well-connected man who's very wealthy and has a lot of military experience. So Fulk is brought over to marry Melisende. Now there will be a cultural difference between these two. Not only is Fulk 20 years older than Melisende, but also Fulk is born and raised in Anjou. Melisende is born and raised in the Crusader states. She was born in Edessa and then spent her adolescence in Jerusalem. The main influence in her early life, because her father is in prison all the time, is her Armenian mother. So Melisende would have grown up bilingual in sort of northern French dialect and Armenian, and raised between the Latin Church and the Greek Orthodox Church. And we know that Melisende's personal religious affiliations are a bit blended, because we'll talk about it later, in her personal prayer book there are very strong Greek Orthodox and Armenian influences alongside the traditional Latin Christian ones. So they're coming from different places, and the marriage is initially successful in that they have a son, which is exactly what the kingdom needs, but there will be conflict. On his deathbed, Baldwin II summons Melisende and her husband Fulk and their infant grandson, and explains that he's changed his mind, and that instead of doing what's expected and leaving power exclusively to Fulk, with Melisende as queen consort, not inheriting any power of her own, he says that instead he's going to leave power in equal measure to Fulk, to Melisende and the baby grandson. This is not what persuaded Fulk to leave his lands in Anjou behind. He thought he was going to be the top dog, indisputably, and he certainly wasn't planning on sharing power with a decade's junior wife. However, the king does this on his deathbed, and the solemnity of the occasion overrules any objections Fulk might have had. So, this triumvirate of power is formed, with Melisende having as much power as Fulk, and they are crowned together in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So, and this is an illustration of the coronation. So, crowns, that, as you can see, they're presented in very equal ways. They're on the same level, they both receive the same crown. They're crowned simultaneously. So, and they're crowned in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Yeah, Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And this whole facade is medieval, so it would have been built in their time, but we'll get to that in a second. So, however, in the early years of Fulk and Melisonde's reign, Fulk does everything he can to sideline his wife and to keep power from her. And he seems to be relatively successful at first. However, within a few years of taking the throne, there will be a major rebellion in favour of Melisonde's interests. And it's hard to discern by reading sources what exactly happens at this time. Melisende is accused of having an affair with her cousin, the Count of Jaffa, who is the same age as her and by all accounts very attractive. And apparently Fulk was incredibly jealous of their close relationship. However, as with, we've talked about it briefly before, as when Arete went to Constantinople, and the chronicles say that she lived a very promiscuous lifestyle there, this seems to be a bit of a smear campaign. There's no evidence at all, apart from sort of some gossip, that Melisende and her cousin were having an affair. What's more likely is that her cousin was standing up for the rights of the local nobility in Outremer. Fulk had come from France with his own soldiers, and he started giving political offices in the Kingdom of Jerusalem to these strangers. They've been termed the Angevin strangers. These men who had not come on crusade, that had not fought and bled and died to establish these states, and had no previous connection to the region. So the established local nobility of the Franks in the First Crusade and the local Christians who'd been given power under that regime were very resentful of Fulk's rule in Jerusalem. He'd just rocked up and been given the crown. None of them were happy with this. Whereas Melisende's cousin, he was the son of Crusaders, he was the Count of Jaffa. And many of the local Christians wanted to see Melisende ruling. Melisende's father had been quite sensible in leaving power equally to both Melisende and Fulk, because Melisende had the loyalties and sympathies of the local population. She was a perfect amalgamation of the different cultures in the Crusader states. She was of Armenian ethnicity, half Armenian, but had been, her mother was of Greek Orthodox faith, but she was also the daughter of the King of Jerusalem, and she'd been born in Edessa, so she had the loyalties of a vast number of people. And it was exactly these groups, the established ruling class of Outremer, that supported Melisende and wanted to see her voice heard more. So her cousin was fighting for her interests. However, this gets caught up in, as we've mentioned, this smear campaign, and someone stands up in the court of Jerusalem and accuses Hugh, Melisende's cousin, of treason against the king. Whether that's having the affair or plotting to kill him, it's unclear, but it's treason. And they challenge him to trial by combat, which is the medieval way of dealing with issues like this. So he will be put into a ring with a champion nominated by the court, who in this case will probably be much stronger and bigger than him, and forced to fight, and then whoever wins will be declared innocent, and if Hugh dies, he's declared guilty. So it's really not a great deal for Hugh. And unsurprisingly, on the day of the trial by combat, Hugh is nowhere to be found. Instead, he's scarpered, but is raising a rebellion against Fulk, and there seems to be at first some support for him. However, he misjudges the mood of his allies, and he creates an alliance with the Egyptians of Ascalon. So he makes an alliance with an Islamic group in order to fight, and this loses the sympathy of the rest of the kingdom, who may until this point have been supporting him, because at this time allying with the Muslim opponents against the King of Jerusalem will lose you support among the Christians. So Hugh's rebellion fails, and he's sentenced to exile, which is actually quite lenient given the amount of trouble he's caused for Fulk. However, while he's awaiting the ship to take him to exile in Italy, he is stabbed by an assassin who, it seems, wasn't officially conscripted by Fulk to kill Hugh, but did it because he thought it would make Fulk happy. So under torture he says, well no, Fulk didn't make me, but I thought it would fix all his problems, so I went ahead and did it anyway. Either way, this is a PR disaster for Fulk. And from this day forward, he loses support in the kingdom. And Melisende is so angry at the death of her cousin and the damage to her reputation through this whole scandal that she really finds her voice and comes into her own. And from this day forward, Fulk is actually terrified of his wife. The chronicles assert that following this event, Fulk never makes any decisions without Melisende's permission. No more charters are issued just in Fulk's name. After this, it's a watershed moment. After this scandal, Melisende's name appear on every charter. The charters issued by the Kingdom of Jerusalem stop being I, Fulk, grant this land, or I, Fulk, grant this power. It becomes we, Fulk and Melisende, agree to this, we do that. And so all of a sudden they are really together. And this goes on very well. Now we know that in this time, Melisende is honouring her Armenian heritage. She makes several grants of money and lands to Armenian communities, and in particular, she contributes to the enlargement of the Armenian Cathedral of St. James, which I'm sure many of you will have visited. And she also becomes a very tireless patron of art and architecture within Jerusalem. So, however, the midway through her reign, how are we doing for time, by the way? Yeah, a little bit longer. Midway through her reign, Fulk dies in a hunting accident, and Melisende does seem to be genuinely sad. They've clearly patched things up because she gives birth to a second son called Amalric, who will become a very successful king a bit later on. And the other evidence we have for them making up is the production of this very beautiful Psalter, the Melisende Psalter it's called. It's kept here in London. If you're lucky, you can probably go and see it at the British Library. It's in the vaults, but if you ask them very nicely, they'll get it out for you and let you have a look. These are the ivory covers. And I'm not an art historian, so I can't tell you for sure, but I've read a lot of articles about it that say these covers are heavily influenced by Armenian Christian art, but someone here might be more of an expert on that than I am. So that carved ivory covers depicting scenes from the life of King David and some scenes from the life of Jesus. So these are the ivory covers. And Fulk has this commission for Melisende, we're told, as a peace offering. I'm just looking for the Fulk. Yeah. And one of the big pieces of evidence that we have that this is a gift from Fulk to Melisende is that there's a carved falcon on the front, which is Fulk's symbol, Fulk's. So you can see that. On top of that, in the calendar of dates just inside the front of the prayer book, which marks out significant dates for the user to pray on, the dates of the deaths of both of Melisende's parents are marked. So this Psalter is certainly a gift from Fulk to one of the daughters of Baldwin II and Morphia, because the date of Morphia's death is marked, and the date of Baldwin II's death is marked, and this will remind Melisende to pray on the days of her parents' deaths. And then this is a very interesting document. It's one of the most important artifacts from the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem because of the richness of the illustrations, and again I'm told these bear heavy Armenian influence in acknowledgement of her heritage. And the reason I'm very keen on this document, and on this page in particular, is that, and unfortunately you can't see it very clearly here probably, but the hands and feet of Jesus in most of the illuminations are the most damaged. So as you can see, the illuminations are in pretty good condition, but in various illustrations, the hands and the feet of Jesus are damaged. And this is a clear sign of this, very typical sign of medieval use. So manuscripts can be damaged in many ways over the many centuries that they've been kept in different conditions. But one of the clearest signs that damage is medieval is when it's damaged in this way, which suggests that actually the owner was kissing the manuscript as part of devotion. People still do this today. You kiss the images of saints and holy books, and so we have a book that maybe Melisende pored over and kissed, which is an amazing connection with this long-dead queen. So, following the death of her husband, I have a nice picture of him falling off his horse here. Yeah, this is Melisende and Fulk out hunting. Fulk falls off his horse and the horse lands on him and he's crushed, and it's very sad. Anyway, Melisende is sad that Fulk dies. She loses her partner and her husband and the father of her children, but equally it gives her unprecedented opportunity to take power. So, her son at this time he's 12 or 13 years of age. He's not yet of age where he can rule. So Melisende is now appointed regent while he grows up, which means that for the first time she's actually genuinely ruling alone in Jerusalem. And she receives this really great letter from Bernard, Abbot of Clairvaux, who's going to be instrumental in preaching the Second Crusade, by the way, but we'll save that, when he says, "With the king your husband dead, and the young king not yet ready to bear the business of the kingdom, and to carry out the office of king, the eyes of all look to you, and on you alone the whole weight of the kingdom falls. You must put your hand to strong things, and show a man and a woman, doing what is to be done in the spirit of counsel and fortitude." And then he goes on, "And there will be those who will think you a king rather than a queen from your acts, lest perhaps the people might say, 'Where is the king of Jerusalem?' But I am not, you say, capable of this. These are great things beyond my strength and knowledge. These are the deeds of men, while I am a woman, weak of body, unstable of heart, not prudent of counsel, not accustomed to affairs. I know, daughter, I know these are great things, but I also know that the swellings of the sea are wondrous, and the Lord is wondrous on high. These are great, but our Lord is great, and his power is great." Okay, so To me, reading this as a modern woman, I would find this letter very irritating. Someone telling me that because I was a woman, I wouldn't possibly be able to do what men have done, that as a woman I'm weak and I can't possibly. But at the time, this is incredibly progressive as a letter to a queen, because not only is he telling her, you can do this, you know, like with the help of God, you will find the strength to carry out the deeds of a king, which is amazing actually, but he's not telling her to get married again. Most of the advice that you would expect to be given to a widowed queen, suddenly in command of a very unstable but very important territory, is marry again, sharpish. So clearly Melisonde's reputation precedes her, and she is known to be a capable and strong woman. She's known to be exceptional as a ruler. And Melisende will prove this time and time again in her reign. It's under Melisende that the kingdom of Jerusalem will reach its greatest territorial extent, so it's very important. It's also under Melisende that Edessa is lost and the Second Crusade is launched. So then Melisende finds herself hosting the armies of the Second Crusade, entertaining Louis of France, Conrad of Germany, and Anne of Aquitaine. So she's playing a major political role at this time. But at the same time, her son is growing up. So the second great event of Melisende's reign, the second great trial and challenge, will be when her son comes of age and tries to take power. And Melisende, instead of ceding power to him when he comes of age at 15, just 2 years after Melisende takes power, instead holds on to power for as long as she can, and eventually finds herself in open war with her son. And it's very interesting that she's able to do this. So we can pass any judgment we like on whether or not Melisende should have kept power from her son, because ultimately that isn't what her father intended when he left power to her, and it isn't what the law requires. The law requires her to give up power to her son. But the fact that she was able to hold on to power for 7 years once Baldwin came of age, it wasn't until he was 22 that he finally managed to oust his mother off the throne. The fact that she had the support from the clergy, from the Templars, the military orders, and from the people of Jerusalem, and to enable her to resist, you know, her son saying, "Mum, it's time, let me be king," it's phenomenal. It speaks a lot to her reputation, her popularity in the kingdom. So she's really established herself as a very powerful authority figure, and she's played the game of politics very well indeed. During her reign, she has won the people of Jerusalem over by conducting major building projects in Jerusalem. So those of you who've been to Jerusalem and been born there, you'll have seen the covered markets, the three covered markets by the Holy Sepulchre. These were built by Melisende. The Church of St. Anne, that was massively expanded and beautified by Melisende. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, most of what we see today, when Melisende came to power, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was not united in one complex. You had a chapel of the Hill of Calvary, Golgotha. You had a separate chapel, the Fountain of the Cross, where St. Helena found the cross. And then you had the Great Rotunda, Constantine's Rotunda, which is where the tomb of Jesus is. But these were separate buildings. It was under Melisende that they were brought together, and that the medieval facade was constructed. So she gave hugely to church and to church institutions, but also to the people. So she had them on her side. She also gave generously in terms of land and tax breaks and privileges to the military orders, which meant they were on her side as well. So she was a very effective queen in shoring up her power base. So she's a very interesting woman. Eventually, her son does manage to go to war with her over the question of who should rule. And so we end up with this very interesting scene of a Christian son besieging his mother in the Tower of David. So Melisende ends up holding up in the Tower of David by the Jaffa Gate in Jerusalem, and her son brings full siege equipment, so trebuchets, catapults, the like, to besiege her. And it lasts for several days, but eventually she capitulates and agrees to give up power to him, except for the territory of Nablus. So even in this disgrace, Melisende retains her importance. She retains control of Nablus, and she stays, even after this massive fallout with her son, she stays one of his most crucial advisors. And so her star never truly diminishes, and she maintains power for all of her life. Then eventually in 1161, very sadly, she will die of a stroke, but she's remembered very, very fondly by the chroniclers, who are usually very critical of female rulers. So when she actually comes to death, I want to read some of the eulogies that are written about her by medieval chroniclers. Let's see. Yeah. During this time, the Queen Melisende, a woman of unusual wisdom and discretion, fell ill of an incurable disease, for which there was no help except death. Her two sisters, the Countess of Tripoli and the Abbess of St. Lazarus of Bethany, watched over her with unremitting care. The most skillful physicians were found to be summoned, and such remedies as were judged best were applied. For 30 years and more, during the lifetime of her husband, as well as afterwards in the reign of her son, Melisende governs the kingdoms of Jerusalem with strength surpassing that of most women. Her rule had been wise and judicious. And it goes on. And then another testimony was, his pious mother, wasted by the constant suffering attendant on a lingering illness, went the way of all flesh. Her death occurred on the 11th day of September. When the king received the news, he gave himself up to grief, and by the depth of his emotion clearly showed how sincerely he had loved her. In fact, for many days after, he was inconsolable. So she had a profound impact, not only on the politics, but on the lives of later kings. She changed the way that women were seen in the political sphere by ruling the kingdom through some of its toughest times. And she was a remarkable woman who changed the face of kingship. And I argue in my book that this in turn influenced female power in Europe, because Eleanor of Aquitaine, when she comes to the east, she's entertained at Melisende's court, and it's only after this that Eleanor really starts to find her own voice and to have a divorce, to marry the King of England, and to begin to really take power. So I argue that Eleanor was in fact inspired by Melisende's example. Likewise, we see other examples in 12th century Europe of women beginning to take power, and this is all following the legacy of Melisende, so she's really interesting. Also, she's just very important as a symbol, as I mentioned before, of the amalgamation of different cultures in the Crusader kingdom. She is ethnically Armenian, half French, has sympathies for the Greek Orthodox Church, and we also see very clearly the Armenian Church and the Armenian communities. I mentioned that one of the great calamities of her reign was the fall of Edessa. Edessa was a majority Armenian populated city that was also the place of her birth, and there's ample evidence of her giving generously to support refugee communities of people coming from Edessa to Jerusalem. She's a very active woman in both affairs of church and state, and she redefines the role of women governing in the medieval Middle East. So, thank you very much for listening.